Well, I think my best advice to parents is to get that clear position done right at the start, because if early on a certain view is formed about a parent or about a case, it's very difficult to change that, because that kind of sort of develops and you're kind of on the back foot all the time. So, it isn't a faceless bureaucrat. It is a trained social worker who does have the children's best interests at heart. They may disagree with you, but they are humans and they have their own pressure. So it's important to establish a rapport with them, because the impression that you make, the relationship you build with them, is as important as the evidence, as the information you supply to them. So,
welcome to Family Court Conversation. In this episode, we look at what parents really need to understand about Cafcass, how family court advisors approach cases, what parents can do to prepare properly, why experience can vary so much, and what support families may need before, during, and after court proceedings. We also talk about parental conflict, litigant in person, and McKenzie friends. Let's get into the conversation. Andy, welcome to Family Court Conversation. Thank you very much for joining me today.
Thank you.
For listeners who don't know you, could you briefly introduce yourself, explain your professional journey, and tell us about the work you do today?
Yeah. Hi, I'm Andy Hyde. I'm a social worker and a life coach. So I'm a trained professional child and family social worker, but also around about 2012, I also trained as a life coach. Currently, I'm working as a freelance practitioner, like an independent social worker, if you will. And I sort of describe myself as a family court mentor. So I'm kind of in the business really of trying to give parents, families advice and support around child arrangements. So I've been a social worker coming up to about 40 years really, so I've kind of lasted the course some time. It's I started work in a children's home and then got trained as a professional social worker. I worked in a long-term local authority social work team, and then for the last sort of 22 years, I worked in Cafcass. So pretty much from the beginning of Cafcass, I joined, and for the first four and a half years, I was what's called like a family court advisor, an officer, a practitioner in Cafcass, and I was doing mainly pretty much 99% public law work, so guardian work, care, and adoption. Absolutely loved it. It was a really good time in my professional career. But then I've always had an interest in training and, of course, coaching. So then for the last 18 years, 17, 18 years of my Cafcass career, I worked in a national it was called an improvement team. So it was training, it was coaching, but a lot of auditing and observing practice. So I spent a lot of my time reading hundreds and hundreds of Section 7 reports. So I've seen a few Section 7 reports, but also observing practitioners in court, giving them feedback, observing them interviewing parents and children. And so it's kind of almost exactly now 2 years. I kind of took semi-retirement or early retirement from Cafcass, and have been working freelance, which is something I promised myself I would do. Many years, going right back to before I trained as a life coach.
You almost give me a little bit of answer, but I want to do this understand. Working directly with parents changed how you now see the family court system?
Yeah, I could have just retired really and put my feet up, but I kind of realised that particularly I enjoyed working as a children's guardian and spending time with children. But when I worked in a national team, apart from the odd observation, I hadn't seen a child for 18 years as a social worker. And I wanted to finish my career actually working direct with parents rather than just with other professional social workers. So it was, and I wanted to kind of work for myself as well. So it was that challenge of having my own business, but also just going back to where I started really, as kind of working directly with families. So that has been challenging, but really good. And it has given me a kind of fresh insight, because you can read a family's file, you can read a report, and you kind of get a flavour for it. You can even talk to a practitioner, but it's given me such insight into the experiences of parents and children, their feelings, the challenges they have, by actually working directly with them. So I could say in one way that it's changed my perspective. It's changed my perspective in many different ways, really, but just confirmed just what a difficult world the world of the family court is. And I have even more kind of empathy, really, for some of the things that families go through, parents go through. Not just the delays and how long it takes, just the costs, the amount of money that some of my clients have kind of said that they've spent on courts and on solicitors and all kinds of things. And at times it can be really kind of heartbreaking, the kind of frustrations that people have with the system.
You have a great insight for the system, so that's what we need to explore now. So turning to Cafcass, what is the single biggest thing parents misunderstand about the role?
Yeah, I think there's kind of a lot, but I think I ought to kind of sort of preface it by saying, really, I have a lot of experience in the family court, and I've worked with many clients directly over these last 2 years. But that experience is going to be limited, because there are so many people that have gone through the system that I just don't know. So I don't really want to speak for them. But just some of the kind of themes that I've kind of sort of picked up on is that a lot of parents going through the kind of family court system, they come from a wide range of kind of sort of backgrounds and experiences, different perhaps to when I was working in kind of sort of the public law, and many of them just won't have experience as social workers. They won't know what Cafcass is, and they may get their information from different forums and things like that. And that, of course, is going to have a particular kind of sort of view on Cafcass, and that's often they come to court with that view that they've picked up from others who have been maybe had a more kind of negative experience. And of course, and it's always been so really that if a parent feels that Cafcass is supporting them, they think Cafcass is great. But if Cafcass are not supporting them, they're going to make complaints. They're going to feel that they're not being supported, they're not being listened to. So some of the things that I think is one of the things that I enjoy about working with parents is kind of drawing upon my experience with Cafcass and trying to demystify and explain really what the role of Cafcass is, and to explain really that they are social workers. And in recent years, Cafcass has tended to want to call their practitioners social workers, because they are actually social workers. They're trained, they have certain values, they know about children's needs, and I think it's important. I think one of the things that maybe does surprise parents is that the word support and advice is in the title of Cafcass, but mainly the practitioners are assessing and reporting, and they kind of wonder, well, where is the support and advice? And I guess that's why I feel that's where I come in, really, because the main role of the Cafcass practitioner is to assess and report. The other things that I think they may misunderstand is that the Cafcass officer is a human as well, and they have their own pressure. They come with their own lenses. They look at things a certain way. They have good days, bad days, lots of pressures on them. And I think that's part of the discussion I had with families really is just reminded them that, there isn't a faceless bureaucrat. It is a trained social worker who does have the children's best interests at heart. They may disagree with you, but they are humans and they have their own pressure. So it's important to establish a rapport with them, because the impression that you make, the relationship you build with them, is as important as the evidence, as the information you supply to them. So lots of things might be misunderstood about Cafcass, and I think there's been a kind of an evolution in Cafcass over the years. When I first started in Cafcass, private law work, this kind of sort of family court work was largely carried out by people who worked in the probation service, the welfare officers. Huge wisdom, huge experience, and they've kind of pretty much largely gone now. They've retired, they moved on. And Cafcass over the years has moved through learning things about safeguarding, about domestic abuse, about the importance of the voice of the child, the importance of diversity, and that evolution will continue, really. So I think it's important that we help families to kind of sort of understand what currently is the agenda, what is the role of Cafcass, and how best to work alongside them. And I think it's about trying to work alongside them, really.
These are really important and useful informations. What mistakes do parents commonly make when speaking to Cafcass or trying to explain their concerns?
Yeah, well, that follows on from the kind of sort of misunderstandings, really. And I guess the first one maybe is that they may assume that you can get the Cafcass officer on your side, and that's what you need to do. All you need to do is to tell your story, and they're going to be on your side, and then they're going to make recommendations that follow on from that. And that's not always the case. They have to be balanced. And when I first dipped my toe into Section 7 reports and working in private law in Cafcass, it was a bit of a kind of a shock to me, really, because I'd go and see a family and I'd speak to the dad. I remember speaking to dad, and I came away thinking, oh, that poor dad, this is absolutely awful. And then I go and speak to mum, and I get a completely different view, and I felt, oh, I've got to kind of decide who's telling the truth, and that wasn't really my role. But that's what happens to kind of inexperienced practitioners, really. They get caught between trying to decide who's telling the truth and who they're going to support. So so I think one of the biggest mistakes is thinking that all you have to do is get the practitioner on your side. Another one is that they're really going to fully understand what it's like to be you. And I've spent a lot of time in my kind of recent role, kind of just listening to parents and trying to understand what's been going on for them. But the Cafcass officer really hasn't got the time to spend really kind of understanding what it's like. And they've got so many cases, it's really difficult to have that amount of empathy. I think you're kind of going mad if you try and kind of have that kind of level of empathy, although it's really important. And similarly, they just won't have time to read all your evidence, and I think that disappoints parents. I think as a kind of a family court advisor going to visit a parent, I think one of the things that kind of makes their heart sink is that the first thing the parent does is place a big, huge folder on the table and go, I've got all this evidence I've been collecting over the years, and I want you to read it, and then expect the Cafcass officer to have the time and inclination to kind of read all that information. Or they've got kind of tapes that they want the practitioner to listen to, or there's WhatsApp messages. They just, because they haven't got the time, they don't really want to get caught, drawn into that conflict to that kind of level, really. And I remember that one of my early cases when I worked in Cafcass, the parents wanted to show me videos of the child having nightmares, and of course one parent said it was the other parent's fault that they had nightmares. So just be careful, really, about assuming that they're going to look at all the evidence and understand all the evidence. Just a couple more, really, that I think that are quite important, is I try and help parents to kind of think about in their written statements, but also in their interviews, is not to be overcritical about the other parent, and to try and balance. There's always good things about other people, and I will ask a parent, well, what did you like about them? They must have liked the other parent at some stage, because maybe, you know, they got married to them, I had children with them. And there will be good things about their parenting. So being overcritical, I think as a Cafcass practitioner, you're going to think, you know, why are you just constantly really kind of negative? It doesn't go down very well. Another one is not accepting responsibility. And that doesn't mean you have to say, put your hands up and say, yeah, I've done really wrong, you know, kind of punish me. But as a Cafcass officer, if you're not accepting any kind of responsibility, even kind of small things, you're just going to be seen as someone who denies, who can't accept that responsibility. So I think it's quite important to, where you've made mistakes, say, yeah, I made mistakes, I wish I could have done better, I really need to learn, and kind of sort of be balanced about that. And lastly, is just don't argue. You're never going to get anywhere if you're trying to argue with a Cafcass officer, if you think they're not listening to you, or they're not getting your point. You just need to kind of calmly and succinctly share your position with them, whether it's for a safeguarded interview or a full Section 7 interview.
I think it's already a big preparation for any kind of interview with Cafcass. Now we know exactly what to take care. On the other side, why can the quality and the approach of the Cafcass assessment appear to vary so much between different practitioners?
Yeah, well, I think when I was at Cafcass, this is something that they were concerned about and trying to work on, and that's why we had local audits with managers, and that's why we had a national auditing team. That's why Ofsted were involved, to try and make sure there wasn't a kind of a postcode kind of lottery. But it will vary from practitioner to practitioner, from team to team, and I think that's down to the personality and experience of the practitioner, the training that they might have had, how much they're prepared to want to sort of follow the guidance, so their kind of sort of attitude to it, how much they really understand and kind of get private law and enjoy it. And I think what's happened when I was last at Cafcass, there was a lot of new, younger, less experienced social workers joining. I mean, I already had 15 years experience of child protection before I joined Cafcass, and that was always the previous thing with kind of guardians, was that, you know, these were ex-managers, these are people that had a wealth of experience, who was doing this kind of work because they enjoyed it, like myself, at the end of the career. But Cafcass in recent years has been seen more as a kind of career option, and people have moved to and fro the local authority. So yes, a lot of younger but less experienced people who really understandably want to kind of join Cafcass to do public law, and then you had probably very little experience when they work for the local authority doing any kind of Section 7s and things like that. It might be something you gave a student to do. You know, it wasn't seen as high profile as a child protection conference or care proceedings or adoption. Yeah, so a lot of practitioners that kind of joined really wanted to do public law, but they were told, you know, actually, you should do private law first, as if it's kind of easier. And then once you've got some private law under your belt, we give you some care cases. And of course, then you're going to have clashes with parents because they come without that wealth of experience or training and understanding exactly what the dynamics and the pitfalls and the challenges of private law family proceedings really are. So yeah, and I think that's one thing that really I get a lot from parents. It's not just the practitioners, it's the courts as well. The feeling that it's very kind of random. They think, well, it's very random what kind of practitioner I'm going to get. It's very random what kind of sort of judge I'm going to get, and that does frustrate parents quite a lot. And even I've observed similar kind of, the same sort of practitioner seem to have take different approaches, and they've got to take each case as it comes. But that's something that parents really have to kind of sort of get to grips with, really, that they can't assume that they're going to get the same service with the same practitioner.
Yeah. Some fathers feel they are not listened to, while some mothers feel their serious risks are minimized. What do you think sit behind these very different experiences?
Yeah, well, I guess a lot of it is kind of depends on the outcome, really, the decisions that are made. And if you feel things are going your way, you feel that you've been heard. And I have worked with a number of parents this year, and again, it kind of made me feel, well, this is kind of really random, where I've worked with mostly, but not always, kind of mothers who have felt that the risks that they've shared haven't been taken seriously, and then mainly, but not always, as working with fathers, they just haven't been heard, or maybe allegations have been made against them, and they feel that they're kind of on their back foot because they're trying to feel they have to kind of disprove those allegations. They feel they've been exaggerated, or they're just not relevant. So I have sort of great sympathy for them, really, and so for me, I try to listen to the parent. I take their concerns very, very seriously, and the best way to kind of help them, really, is to make sure that they're prepared in terms of how they share their evidence, how they tell their story, to have a strategy about that, and to make sure. I think my best advice to parents is to get that clear position done right at the start, because if early on a certain view is formed about a parent or about a case, it's very difficult to change that, because that kind of sort of develops and you're kind of on the back foot all the time. So the earlier I can work with parents, the easier it is, really, to work on that strategy to make sure that they have clear goals and good, clear evidence that they can present. So that's
the key.
Particularly the safeguarding, whilst Cafcass is still doing safeguarding letters. I was speaking to a parent the other day who said, well, the previous one they just thought it was a little chat, just having a chat with the officer, and they didn't realise the importance of the recommendations in the safeguarding letter and how it then influenced the rest of the proceedings. So I have a couple of occasions, I've even role played, because I kind of was involved in preparing the scripts for the safeguarding interviews, and they do follow a particular script. I'm able to kind of share that with the parents, and say, well, these are kind of questions that you're going to be asked, and this is the kind of information they're looking for. This is what they're going to put in their report and their safeguarding letter. And so on a couple of occasions we've kind of role played it. So I pretended to be the Cafcass officer, and then afterwards they said, well, when I had my interview, it was exactly like you said. They asked the same kind of questions in the same kind of way, and I think it's helpful for them to be asked those kinds of challenging questions, so they're not kind of wrong-footed when they are. I guess for some it might feel a bit like cheating, but there's nothing wrong with being properly prepared and making sure.
It's not cheating, for sure. I think the questionnaire is public, so you can download it from online.
Yeah. I mean, that would be good advice to do that. There's always a particular format, but remember, it's a safeguard. The safeguarding interview is about safeguarding, so you should be asked about all areas: alcohol, drug, mental health, domestic abuse, and you need to be able to give a succinct answer. And I think the difficulty for a lot of parents is they want to, in that 50 minutes, however long they've got, they want to tell the whole story, and then they end up missing off important bits of information that they should have really shared.
I'm going to have a difficult question for you. How can a professional distinguish harmful parenting conflict from domestic abuse or coercive and controlling behavior? Yeah,
well, I say it's more of an important, serious question rather than it's not that difficult to answer, really, because Cafcass and myself involved when I was there did quite a lot of work on understanding the distinction between domestic abuse and parental conflict, or as they kind of coined it, harmful conflict, because not all conflict is necessarily seen as harmful. When you look at it in terms of the impact on a child, both can have very serious consequences for the children, and that would depend on the child's resilience on the situation. So there are situations where maybe the parental conflict is at such a high level, it's gone such a long time. Actually, when you look at the impact on the child, it's almost far more serious than domestic abuse. So you can't say one is more serious than the other. And it has kind of sort of similar behaviours as well. The parental conflict can include actual physical violence. So domestic abuse isn't just about physical violence, but parental conflict can have where both parents are being violent kind of to each other. So the arguments become kind of physical. And then, of course, you can have domestic abuse where there's no physical violence, but there might be controlling behaviour, or there might be gaslighting, there might be kind of threats. But it is important to distinguish them, and they do have tools, or they call them kind of practice aids now. There's a series of questions that they can ask to help them kind of work it. Is it domestic abuse? Because what's important in terms of distinguishing between them is the kind of response. So if it's largely parental conflict, then things like mediation, that kind of approach is more likely to work. With domestic abuse, you've got to be aware that it's where there's a dynamic of one victim and a perpetrator, and that's very different to parental conflict. So parental conflict is more likely to be involving kind of both parents together, maybe one more than the other. But there isn't that kind of similar dynamic as domestic abuse, where there's one person who is perpetrating the abuse, and the other person tends to be the victim. And families can move. What makes it even more complex is that families can move between it. So maybe a situation that maybe did start with domestic abuse then becomes one of parental conflict later on, or maybe during proceedings or after proceedings. So it's something that practitioners and courts, of course, need to be very aware of, very clear exactly what they're talking about. But at the end of the day, we mustn't forget that what we are really talking about is parental behaviour, however we label it, that will impact on children's lives, not just for the now, but for the future as they grow up and their relationships.
Yes, thank you. That's very important. When we spoke earlier, you mentioned Cafcass positive parenting program. What was it designed to achieve, and how was it different from simply preparing a Section 7 report? Yeah.
So, that's one of my proudest achievements of when I worked in Cafcass. So I've had, although I said I have this background in public law, myself and a particular other colleague who's still working at Cafcass, we had lots of discussions. We were both very interested in parental conflict, very interested in how you can give the support and advice to families in these situations. They came from a kind of family therapy kind of background, and I came from this kind of sort of coaching kind of background, as well as the sort of child protection. And throughout its history, Cafcass has had different schemes for helping parents, but in 2017, didn't seem like there's many of those around. So in 2017, we kind of set up and invented the Cafcass Positive Parenting Program, and we set about training as many practitioners around the country, as kind of a national thing, as we could to provide the program. And as you said, yeah, it was an alternative to a Section 7 report. So those cases where there had been already the risk fully assessed, and it was seen that the kind of parental conflict was the main kind of issue, Cafcass and the courts can make a decision with the family to maybe not do a Section 7 report where you're assessing, interviewing and writing reports, but actually trying to help people. So it was like kind of mediation. So we would, in the program, you would interview the parents like you would for a Section 7 report individually, but quite differently. You would then have a joint meeting with the parents where you would try and narrow the issues. You would try and kind of work out what the kind of barriers were. And it did involve kind of working with children as well. So an important part of the work was about the kind of narratives, the kind of stories that families have about each other and about the experience that they had. So in the program, we would help the children to write a letter to the parents explaining just how their conflict, the divorce, separation, those kind of things, the arrangements, how it impacted on them. And then in the work with jointly with the parents, that letter would be read to them. And even in the training, you could hear a pin drop as people actually listen to the words of the child. So, as Cafcass said, the importance of the voice of the child, but actually reading a letter of a child saying, I really don't like it when you argue on the doorstep. I feel kind of really embarrassed. I don't like it when I kind of feel that I'm caught in between you, that, I feel like I'm being disloyal to one parent and the other. And the parents have to kind of hear that. And then they write back a joint letter. And quite often children have fantasies about maybe, if they behave themselves, if they tidied the room, maybe daddy wouldn't have left home. That kind of sort of egocentric kind of sort of way of seeing the world as a young child. And so there's a lot of kind of guilt and misinformation they have about it. So in the program, the parents would write a joint letter thanking the child for their letter, showing that they understood. Quite often they would say, they apologise, that we didn't realise how much this affected you. And then they maybe wouldn't promise to be like perfect, but they promised, to try to work things out for them, trying to communicate better.
And this is really child-focused behaviour approach.
Yeah.
Yes.
And it was a lot of it was based on kind of the importance of the parents listening to each other and listen to the other person's kind of position. So things like mentalization, putting yourself in the shoes of the other person, kind of empathy was really important. So so you can try and understand where they're coming from, and maybe not always what they do and what they say comes from a negative point of view. It's just a kind of a misunderstanding. So yeah, it was kind of therapeutic, really. It did win a couple of awards, and it did have a lot of kind of sort of positive feedback, and practitioners were comfortable using the scheme who like kind of mediation, things like that. Really enjoyed it. But I understand, I think since I left Cafcass, it was involved in the pathway pilots, but I think they've shelved it now. I don't think Cafcass are doing the CPP anymore.
But they do something else. So I wanted to ask your view of the Pathfinder, the new child-focused approach. Yeah. What does it improve, and how do you see possible gaps or risks?
Yeah. Well, as I said, I was involved with the pilots in a way that I would kind of auditing. I would help them with the CPP when that was used as one of the kind of tools that they had. Particularly kind of in the southwest of England, and then it kind of moved into other parts of the country, the Midlands, etc. But in the last 2 years as a freelance practitioner, I've had a few cases that are sort of fallen into the Pathfinder now, sort of the child focused courts. But it really is kind of a small sample, kind of limited, and maybe not always a helpful kind of experience, but maybe not down to the program, but maybe down to kind of sort of the individuals who are particularly working. And I've been to a few kind of sort of workshops and trying to find out a bit more about exactly what it's going to be. And I think we don't really know until it's kind of sort of fully rolled out. But I do support the concept of reducing court time, because that's expensive, but also very frustrating, very damaging for children, for proceedings to go on. I mean, I've got some families where they're into the 4th year now, really, really damaging, frustrating for them. But my concerns really is that the time, when you reduce the time in court, you don't lose the time to do a full assessment, to make sure that people do feel that they have time to be fully assessed. And the other thing that I feel that I'm kind of sort of looking to see where it is where are those elements of support? Is it still about assessing and reporting within the program? What support will be offered to parents to help them kind of sort of address their kind of many issues, and what is the role for programs such as the ICFA? Is that going to remain? What will replace it? What services are there going to be out there for parents within the sort of the child focused Pathfinder courts, and also then what's going to be there afterwards as well.
Fascinating. I would like to move now from Cafcass to a wider system. You support parents before court, during proceeding, and after the proceeding have finished. How does the support they need different at each stage?
Yeah, well, I think the focus will vary, but I mean, it varies according to every different situation, every different family. And my advice and support and mentoring, coaching aims to be bespoke, so it's fitting around the needs of the family rather than me imposing what I think is needed. And I kind of right from the start felt it needed to be a kind of a wraparound service, because there are families have different needs at different times. So mainly divided into those three parts: the kind of the pre-court. So this is where maybe you would expect that the conflict between the parents would be less entrenched. So maybe they haven't had years of being in court. This is new to them, and they're maybe thinking about, do we need to go to court? Are there things that we can do to avoid going to court? So in these situations, I can help the parents with maybe, and I have done with some like dispute resolution, sort of mediation work with the two of them. It may be some co-parenting advice, or something kind of psychoeducational, where I talk about some of the things you need to take on board when co-parenting. It's been work with children, and I hadn't expected to do so much of this, but I have quite enjoyed doing this, kind of working with children before it gets into the court system, so that the parents can hear the voice of their child, and so they can understand exactly how they're feeling. So the kind of the pre-court work can be really effective if you can help parents avoid going to court. But a lot of it is kind of sort of very new to them. In court, most of my work is done kind of in court, as I say, as a family court mentor, where I largely support one of the parents. So one of the parents will engage me to be one of their team. Sometimes they have solicitors, sometimes they don't have solicitors, so they see me as an alternative, maybe a cheaper alternative to a solicitor. I have done some McKenzie friend work, but I'm very clear with the parents. I'm not legally trained, although I understand the family court system and the orders and things like that. I don't give legal advice. I'm basically a kind of a social worker. But I will work alongside parents, whether they've got a solicitor or not, to help them. A lot of it is really just support, is kind of just cheering them on, because a lot of them feel completely lost and really frustrated. No one's listening. But to have someone that give me up and just talk to about how a contact went, or how there's a recent kind of sort of disagreement. But a lot of it is about kind of strategy and helping them put their evidence together. So occasionally I might help them write their kind of sort of court reports. And I think some of the feedback's been what's been really helpful for parents is helping to prepare, as I said, for safeguarding letters and for the Cafcass or the local authority interviews for Section 7 reports, just help them to think about how they're going to engage with the social workers, how they're going to present themselves, what kind of evidence they need to talk about, and that's been really helpful for them to just kind of sort of prepare for something which is completely kind of new and alien to them and quite scary. And then lastly, the post-court. So I think that in recent years, the figures were something like 30% of private law cases will come back for future litigation. So obviously the order is broken down and they're back in court. And it's really difficult for courts to kind of sort of give detailed orders that are going to kind of solve every problem for a family. And of course, situations change. New partners come into the scene, children grow up and have different views. But if I can help parents not have to resort to returning back to court, then I will help them. And it's been like working with the child. So I've done some work helping the child maybe be reintroduced to a parent. That is quite sort of challenging work, but work that I feel sort of qualified to do because of my social work background. But also kind of work around kind of sort of parenting plans. So rather than going to court and getting the court to make an order, I will spend time with the parents, helping them to actually prepare a parenting plan together where all the details, all the dates are there. But it's so much more than just agreeing dates. It's about just understanding, agreeing how they're going to communicate, how they're going to resolve disputes themselves. So it's kind of a therapeutic exercise as well.
That's a frame, and they can follow it, so that's a really useful tool. We already touched a little bit this. You said that not all parental conflict is harmful. When does an ordinary disagreement become harmful conflict for a child?
Yeah, well, I think it is like domestic abuse. I mean, harmful conflict is a kind of continuum, and I often it's where the parents almost kind of sort of lose sight of what's happening for their child because they're so engrossed in the battle with their ex-partner or their ex-husband or ex-wife, and they have such strong feelings, such strong emotions. It becomes a kind of a personal battle, and so the kind of things that you'd normally see are things like anger, mistrust, loss of respect, a lot of hurt, a lot of rage about the ex-partner. And then, of course, what happens is they have these feelings about their ex-partner, but then they kind of assume that this is how they're going to be as parents. So sometimes people can be better parents than they were better partners or husbands or wives. And so, if you mistrust, because maybe your partner's has an affair, you may lose respect and trust for them, but that doesn't mean you can't trust them as a parent, or respect them for things they do as a parent. So some of the things that I think are really difficult for children, that you see time again is the oversharing, where the parents perhaps use the child as a confidant, where they use the child to convey messages between the two parents, and the child just gets stuck in the middle, or a parent is just really negative about the other parent. So these feelings they have about the other parent is then placed into the child, and that child comes from the other parent. They love that other parent, and yet they're hearing all these kind of negative comments. And it really doesn't have to be a negative comment. It can just be a look. And so, like, they mention, say, the father's name, and mum kind of raises her eyebrows, or just kind of just looks in a certain negative way. Children are really good at reading that and picking it up, and it's really difficult for parents, but it is so important for parents to try and be as positive as they can about the other parent, despite all the things, all the experiences that they've had, and to do what they can to promote, to understand the benefits, unless of course they're real kind of risks to the child, but understand the benefits of a child having a positive relationship with both their parents. So I mean, conflict is within marriages. There's going to be conflict about parenting styles, about how to handle a teenager, how much pocket money to give, and it just gets even more exaggerated when that love is kind of broken down, and people are separated, and that trust isn't there, and that just impacts so badly on children. It's a bad model for them in terms of understanding about relationships, and they kind of sort of take that into their adult life. But emotionally, it's so difficult for these children to have to kind of walk that tightrope, to kind of walk on kind of eggshells really between their parents. It's really kind of really difficult for them. And remember, it's not always about the quantum of contact, it's about the quality of contact. So quite often, because the parents are stuck in this battle between each other, they don't want to give the other parent any inch at all. So it's got to be 50-50, maybe for financial reasons, but maybe for kind of emotional reasons. It's got to be shared care. It's got to be 50-50, and they're not having a minute more than me. And it's not about how much time you spend with your child, it's the quality of that time you have with the child, and that relationship. So really difficult, challenging world, the world of parental conflict. And it's something that I think parents just need so much kind of education about. I think that's why kind of parenting programs are really useful that focus on it, but also it's just support really, and people need to listen in ear, and you really don't get much chance for that within the court proceedings, and you can't really expect the Cafcass officer to be able to do that when writing their Section 7 report. And they don't really want to be accused of bias as well. So they will listen to a bit, but they don't have time and they don't feel that they can, completely listen to your story, because the other parent feel, well, actually, you didn't listen to my story. But that's often what people want. They want to be heard, they want to be listened to and understand just how difficult it's been for them.
A few interesting points you said. I'm gonna tell you my personal view on disagreement is not automatically harmful. I think the children can also learn from seeing adults calm down, take responsibility, apologize, or repair the disagreement. So I believe the greater concern is when conflict becomes frequent and intense, and actually is not properly resolved afterwards. That's the main problem. Yeah. What can parents realistically do at an early stage to stop conflict becoming entrenched?
Yeah, well, I guess the first thing is to try and avoid going to court. See court as a last resort, and I know that's what is hoped, because once you're in our court system, you then have solicitors, and it feels like winning and losing, and parents will talk about, I've won my case, and it's about disproving the other case. So however much we try and avoid it, it does become a kind of a battleground. So trying to resolve issues early and out of court, I would say, is the best thing to do. But it's having that, I think it's about humility, really, taking a step back, being truly child-centered, which would mean that you would make decisions that actually might not be in your favour, but actually are best for your child, and having that ability to be child-centered, to actually think, well, actually, I really can't stand the sight of him, but I can see he's got a good relationship with my child, and my child really needs to spend more time with them. And communication, kind of learning communication. It's so much difficulty for parents when they're separated, when they have a kind of all the feelings. But those lines of communication really need to be kind of open. And the best examples that I've seen is where parents have got to a stage where they can have like a weekly phone call or go out for coffee monthly and put all their differences aside, but just actually spend some time talking about the child, making sure that they're keeping focus on their child that they have together. But also understanding the impact on the child and kind of listening to the child. So there's lots of things that they can do, but it's not something that parents expect or imagine is going to happen. When you get married, you enter a relationship, you have a child with somebody, you're not really thinking it's going to end in a lot of conflict and with unhappy children. So people are just not kind of prepared or ready for it, and it's a bit of a shock. So having access to support, really, and advice, I think is crucial. And I kind of developed a view this last 2 years, actually, that well, maybe a majority, if not all, of parents that enter our family court system, our private law proceedings, they are families in crisis and they are children in need. And yes, maybe we should offer them some mediation initially, but I think they need a service. And I think the government from time to time has tried to spend money on this, but I think there needs to be a kind of a more coherent plan of how we're going to recognise the needs of these families and to support them.
What is the difference between co-parenting and parallel parenting, and when might each approach be more realistic?
Yeah, I mean, basically we just talk about parenting, really, and parenting when you're apart. But these are terms that are used, and I guess really it depends on the kind of sort of the level of conflict. So there will always be different kind of parenting styles, and children quite resilient and kind of good at kind of working it out. So maybe, when they go to dad lets them eat pizza on the sofa and go to bed when they're tired, but mum says you've got to eat at the table, you've got to eat your greens, and your bedtime is 8 o'clock. It can be a bit confusing for children, but they kind of manage to navigate that and kind of understand that. So co-parenting is really when parents are still talking, when there's still those lines of communication, when they are apart, but they're kind of trying to parent together. So they're both going to parents' evening, maybe together. They go to children's events. They're sharing information. They are agreeing on kind of sort of dates for contact arrangements. So parallel parenting, I would say, is more where parents are kind of on their own kind of track, really. So a child goes to spend time with one parent, and maybe the other parent just feels, well, okay, we've been ordered that's where they go. They will get on and do their thing when they're there. When they come back to me, they come back to me. So I think where there's particular situations of high risk, I think parallel parenting is more realistic than co-parenting, because co-parenting does involve more communication, more working together. And where there's high risk, and those risks are continuing, there's risks of harassment and those kind of things. You don't really want to be recommending too much kind of co-parenting, because it just provides another platform venue for the conflict to continue, and for people to be harmed. And some people just can't physically, kind of emotionally, kind of sort of deal with the ex-parent on that kind of level. So that's, I think, where parallel parenting, I would say, is where not so much kind of a failure, but where things are just, you can't do the ideal, which is actually parenting together.
I would like to turn now to litigant in persons and McKenzie friends. From your experience inside Cafcass, how are litigants in person generally viewed by professionals within the system?
Yeah, so when I first started Cafcass in the sort of the turn of the century, in the early 2000s, most parents had kind of sort of access to solicitors, but now it's kind of sort of tipped on its head, really, and increasingly throughout the years. Legal aid was kind of reduced, and court expenses got just out of hand for some parents. So many parents kind of felt forced to. Maybe it's a choice, but many feel just forced to financially to represent themselves. There's lots of kind of support out there to help them. There's that kind of other services, paralegal services and things that they can access to help. There's lots of advice online. A lot of parents kind of use AI to help them write reports. So there is a lot of kind of help out there. And I think Cafcass have got used to it. It's something now that they are aware of, and of course they will try and help and advise as much as they can. But of course, they're not given legal advice to parents. They can't take the place of a solicitor. They've got to be kind of non-biased. So that's something which can be kind of difficult for parents when they're on their own. And courts, my experience of courts will be that they will try and give us as much help and support to a litigant in person, recognising that they're on their own. But then I have also witnessed where cases have gone certain ways because one parent's turned up with a barrister, another parent's on their own, and they've had the floor wiped, really, and it's kind of really difficult for them. On the receiving end, I have given evidence in court where I was cross-examined by a parent. In fact, that's continued to kind of in this role, really. And that, I think, is where the most difficulty is, the advocacy, really. You can get help writing reports, you can present your position in court, but it's the advocacy, it's the cross-examination, which is a particular skill, which I think is going to be most challenging to parents. And courts will give a lot of scope to parents doing that themselves. But my experience has been they kind of use it as a platform to kind of put their views across, rather than to ask questions to try and elicit the kind of oral evidence.
I think it's going to be a very obvious question that do you think that the family court expect too much legal and procedural knowledge from the ordinary people?
I don't know if they do, and I think because the more understanding you have about what a certain order is, and what suite of kind of orders there are that you can kind of draw on, it does really help. And courts try and kind of explain that. But I kind of, as I said, I think my view increasingly has been that these families are in need, they're in crisis, and they need a kind of a multi-agency support before they even get into court, really. so that it's and this does happen in other countries where it's not so much a legal thing where your child is like a possession, where it's a contract that you're arguing over. It's actually a family need that needs a social work response rather than a kind of legal response. So it'd be really good if we had more services that supported and educated families in these situations, and then maybe the legal bit was tagged on at the end, almost like a kind of a rubber stamp into all that work is done beforehand.
I'm gonna have my favorite question now. From your experience working at Cafcass, how were McKenzie friends generally viewed, and has your own opinion changed since you began acting as one?
Yeah, it's difficult for me to talk on behalf of Cafcass. Even when I was there, I wouldn't necessarily know. But my kind of personal view, I think, is developed. So we just the service has got more professional, I think, and so. In previous experience, when McKenzie friends were used, they tended to be kind of friends of the family, someone who perhaps didn't have such a range of kind of legal knowledge and professionalism, and to my experience was not particularly positive, because I felt that it just made situations more kind of complex and more kind of conflict, and it kind of work the parent up in a way that they didn't need to be worked up. But I think my experience in the recent years has been that McKenzie Friends Service are so much more kind of professional. There may be kind of ex solicitors themselves. They might have a lot of legal training, and courts. I think it does vary in courts to kind of respect the gift of McKenzie Friends. I know when I've done the role, I just find it really frustrating not being able to talk into the court. I really want to talk to the court, and that's kind of difficult for me. But there can be a lot of positive impacts for the parents of helping them to, it can be that kind of supportive, kind of calming them down aspect, which I think is really good, helping them to understand and kind of be reasonable and to try and see the other side. But just having things explained to them, the processes of court, the different characters in court, the different laws, I think that's kind of really helpful. So if there was a litigant person and they weren't going to use a barrister or a solicitor, I certainly would recommend now a McKenzie Friend. And I wouldn't have said that 10, 20 years ago.
What can a good McKenzie Friend add to the case, and what difficulties can a poor McKenzie Friend create?
Yeah, well, I think three things really: support, and support,
and maybe support.
Yeah, I just having someone sitting alongside you going to court it's just so important, because it can be a scary kind of alien world for many parents. But somebody who's there keeping them calm, kind of cheering them on is so important, but also just having that knowledge, really, the knowledge of the courts, the process, to explain what Section 7 is, to help the parents say, actually, it's okay, you can agree to have the Section 7, you can, this can be supportive for you, or explaining why you should try mediation. And I kind of muse them really where the McKenzie Friends Service will go in the future. Will it kind of morph into a more kind of sort of mediation role as well, and work with both parents and families? I think I can see that there. But so I think again, it's like social workers, like Cafcass workers, like court officials. Really, it can be random, and it's down to kind of the individual, the dedication, the professionalism, the experience of the individual is what counts. It counts more, really.
What kind of post-court support can help parents make an order work and avoid returning to the court? Or is the system sometimes too focused on producing an order rather than helping families live with that afterwards?
Yeah, well, I remember the child arrangements program coming in a few years back, and I think it's now ready for review and changing. And I remember a term that they used, because I was involved in the training in Cafcass, and that's what courts cannot or do not want to micromanage families. And so the orders sometimes can be quite detailed, but they can't cover everything. And as I say, children grow up, situations change. So the courts aren't really the place to go if you want your kind of arrangements to become micromanaged. So so the post-court support really is around how you're going to make that order work, and it almost needs to be, I think, a service that the courts can send people to as soon as orders are made and say, well, this isn't the end of it. We can do a MIAM mediation before, but maybe there should be a service they can go to afterwards. And I know we've had things like ICFA, which can help. And if the courts can remember, doing the Parenting Together for Children programs like that, the old SPIP, were really important for helping people to kind of learn about communication, learn about conflict, learn about how to co-parent, really. So that kind of psychoeducational bit, I think, is so important. And maybe it's after proceedings, parents in a different space where actually they're more prepared to take that on, because just future litigation is just costly for families. It clogs up the courts, and sometimes it can just be a matter of months after proceedings, because maybe the order wasn't right, or it wasn't detailed enough, or one parent was never really going to follow it. I think that then parents need to be encouraged to take up as much post-court support as they can. But I guess by the end of proceedings, they've kind of had enough, really, and maybe their pockets are empty as well, in terms of if they're going to pay for that service.
Looking ahead, what single change would most improve the family justice system for children and parents?
Yeah, well, I think I'm going to welcome the introduction of MIAMs and directing parents away from courts and going to mediation before kind of entering the courts at that point of application. But it's not for everybody. And one of the things I learned with the CPP really is that what families need is not so much kind of a mediation service. Sometimes it works for people, yeah, sure, where you're just trying to see if you can narrow the issues and get an agreement. There's a lot of kind of therapeutic work that needs to be done, a lot more time in terms of supporting and advising and trying to unpick and maybe challenging as well. And so many parents come into this situation with their own histories of abuse in their families, of seeing their own families split up, maybe alcohol abuse, drug abuse. So this is what's really helped me to feel that these families are families in need, really, and they may not even hit the threshold for the local authority, and the early help and support that local authorities have got to give to a wider range of people in our society. But these families, I think, are in crisis, and the children in need, and schools will tell you when they see the children at school, how the children are in terms of their behaviour and their mental health and their emotional well-being while these kind of conflicts are going on, while these disputes are going on, while there's court proceedings. A teacher will be able to tell you if a child is about to see one parent at the weekend, or they've saw the parent the previous weekend, they might be tighter, they might be more moody, they might be a little bit upset. And so schools are having to pick up a lot of this with children. So so I think the one change, and I think I'm kind of like at the end of my career now, I probably won't be there to be involved in it, but it'd be lovely to see a kind of a joined up multi-agency service that is working with families at this earlier stage, providing the support and the advice that they need, even before they kind of reach the family courts, and before the conflict becomes entrenched. And this has got to involve a system of risk assessment as well. And the early days when I was at Cafcass, there just wasn't that level of risk assessment either. So they weren't doing police checks in every family, but of course now, as people go to the courts, there will be police checks for local authority. It's a lot more kind of sort of joined up, but you got to know who you're dealing with, really. So you're trying to mediate with somebody, and you don't realise that one of the adults you're working with has just come out of prison for battery. So you really don't want to get those kind of two people together. So there needs to be a level of risk assessment, but then a program of support where people are given time to be heard, to kind of support it and work with, but also the children given time and space for the children to be helped in these situations as well, because they're often the ones that are the greatest victims in this.
That's a proper system you put together. Finally, where can listeners find out more about your work, and what kind of support can they contact for you?
Yeah, so I have a website, familycourtmentoring.com. So people can go on there, they can see some of the things that I do, they can ring me, they can email me, and discuss their situation, and I can find out how I can help them. If I can help them, we can kind of agree that together. So yeah, it's down to the parents really, whether they want my kind of support, whether they have a solicitor, a McKenzie friend or not. Whilst I'm still working as a social worker and as a coach, I'll be here to continue to provide that support and advice.
Andy, I think this is a very good place to finish. Thank you very much for joining me and sharing the experience and perspective with us.
Okay, well, thank you for giving me the opportunity.
That was my conversation with Andy Hyde. We covered what parents need to understand about Cafcass, how to prepare for the process, and some of the wider challenges families face in and around the family court. You can find more information about Andy and his work in the description below. If you find this conversation useful, please subscribe to Family Court Conversation and share the episode with someone who may benefit from it. Thank you for listening.